time when I come to DC Finance, I usually hold a panel, but there are very few people that could actually captivate you, your imagination, your right and left brain continuously, and Susan is one of them, and I don't say that haphazardly. Now, Susan is a baroness not because of family, but because of her achievements. And one of the things that I really find captivating about you is that, people talk about, the whole Oracle of Delphi, know thyself. But most people either look at things from a noetic sense or they look at it from a materialistic sense. You really explored the human mind from all directions. So I'd love to start off with how your journey began, because it's not the usual journey for a neuroscientist.
Okay, so first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here, and thank you very much for this opportunity, Marianne. And that's a wonderful way to start, because it was a rather strange journey, I suppose. Perhaps everyone has a strange journey, where perhaps the moral of the story is just whatever comes along, you go with it, if it seems right. So when I was at school, I hated science. I'm now a scientist, and I hated it. Because it's all about the amoeba, and the amoeba just splits in two, you just draw true circles, yeah? And then chemistry was distilling water, which was stenciling conical flasks, and no one told me why that was interesting or important, and it seemed a bit dull. Whereas I was really worried about why people fell in love, and how they fell in love, and why wars started, and what made you different from me. So, in a sense, science just didn't deliver it, whereas history and literature really did, and in particular, the classics, Latin and Greek. Because that was all about two great civilizations that very economically you could do history and literature together, because the literature was the history, the literature was the history, and the two civilizations were so different in terms of how they saw empire and how they saw life, how they saw the self. For me, it was the complete education, which is why perhaps it's very old-fashioned. If I ruled the world, I would have everyone doing Latin and Greek and ancient history. Yeah? And I hated science. I gave it up immediately, and if anyone had said I was one day going to be CEO of a biotech company, I would have thought they were completely from another planet, So then I went up to Oxford to do philosophy, because I got really interested in certainly studying Greek and the philosophy. And that was all about formal logic, which I'd also done maths, so that was very challenging. And it was about language. I remember sitting in the library, and there was a whole chapter on the definite article, on thee. You can imagine, you think, have I got time on this planet to sit there, agonizing about thee? Yeah. So there was this new subject going at the time called psychology, and even though I didn't have the credentials, it says a lot for Oxford. They put a premium on motivation and enthusiasm, and I did that, and then I drifted to the more kind of physiological options. And then I found the very questions I'd asked as a schoolgirl I could address from the science, which is, what makes you different from me? What is the mind? What is a human? What is a person? Yeah, why are they different from animals? What is consciousness? One of the biggest excitements of all. And suddenly I found the questions that I'd framed when I was younger that I think are the very core, which what the ancients framed, yeah, which is destiny, determinism, and how much is free will and individual. All those questions could be addressed by doing neuroscience. So there I am, a neuroscientist.
So it's definitely not your usual journey. But I think the fact that you came at neuroscience from a different perspective, from a philosophical perspective, from a humanities perspective, has given you what I would say the heart, as well as an ability to look at things a little differently.
Yeah.
And one of the things that, and why I wanted you all to hear this, is right now Alzheimer's is something that is a big concern. It's touched pretty much everybody in this room. We all know somebody who has been dealing with this horrible disease. But most of the time people look at it as something that happens to you, like most disease, you catch a cold. But whereas Alzheimer's is something that's working within the body. And what makes Susan's research so fascinating is that, I love this metaphor you gave me when you talked about basically how a house, the switches for the electricity, and how some of them turn off and some of them turn on. And you really started questioning, if this is a natural process in the body, why does the body tend to do this? Mm-hmm. And that's something that I haven't heard anyone really ask that kind of question before.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think you're touching on aging and the process of aging, which is a very hot topic at the moment, specifically longevity, especially people who think they're going to live forever or want to live forever. Everyone's very interested in this. So now even conditions such as Alzheimer's are regarded as multi-organ diseases. That's to say, we know there's a connection with the skin, with psoriasis, for example, and Alzheimer's. We think there's also a connection with cancer and Alzheimer's. Most exciting, what we're doing at the moment, is the retina and diabetic retinopathy, showing a connection there. with Alzheimer's on the retina, which again leads to some very interesting applications. So we have to think of mechanisms and when they go wrong, and then it will depend on the context and the place that they go wrong as to the indication that will then present itself. So you have to look at things in a non-dogmatic way, and I think having always been able to make a fool of myself because I didn't know any science anyway, I was allowed to ask Emperor's New Clothes type questions. And certainly when you're studying the brain, you have to, or in biology or science, you have to really put your head above the parapet and challenge dogma, as someone called Thomas Kuhn once said, and then you get a complete change, you get a paradigm shift, which is the most exciting. So I think we need a paradigm shift now for studying Alzheimer's, because the current approaches are just not working. They are not working. That is to say, targeting something called amyloid with antibodies, which are chemicals ending in ab, these medications, they're just not working. And we need to have a new approach. We need a paradigm shift.
And rather than just thinking about that, Susan is actually already engaged in coming up with an Alzheimer's prevention drug, which I think is revolutionary. But one of the things that you talked about, I know in some of your past conversations, is how people are looking at T14. Can you define that? And
you're the only person who knows what T14 is in the whole room. So this will be the fastest ever neurochemistry course you've ever done, right? It'll last for 30 seconds. So T14 is a molecule that we've identified because it's composed of 14 little building blocks, so called amino acids. So that's why it's called. Not a very original name. And my life's work over decades has been to show how this particular brain chemical is actually driving the neurodegenerative process. But in some circumstances, it's a good thing. In development, it actually helps cells grow and renew. So why would it be linked to Alzheimer's? Well, it's like a Jekyll and Hyde in that what might be beneficial in development, if it's triggered aberrantly in the context of a mature brain, then Jekyll becomes Hyde, then the good becomes the bad. And so that's what we've worked on, and our medication is actually the evil chemical itself, but chemically put out of action, sort of bent into a circle, a bit like tying your hands behind your back. And the MHRA, which is our FDA regulatory body equivalent, have actually acknowledged this is a novel drug, so we've got a passport of innovation, which is a great start. But it's a very different approach, but one that I'm emboldened to do because I've always been the outsider. I've always been the person who didn't know the basics. I've always been the one to ask the silly and basic questions. So for me, it's actually talking.
I know there are a lot of other applications too in terms of beauty industry and whatnot. And the sad thing is she typically gets more people interested in the vanity portion than in the health of the brain. But, it doesn't matter how good you look if your brain isn't working. So I think that your work is just extraordinary. And considering with COVID and what we all hear about brain fog, one of my deepest concerns personally is, are we going to be seeing a huge influx of dementia in the future from what brain fog is doing with our brains? And if there isn't someone like you doing this research, what does that mean for us?
Sure. Well, as everyone I'm sure is aware, and many of you like me will have a close relative, in my case with my mum, who suffered, and I can look you in the eye and say I know what that feels like, you will know that it is not like cancer or heart disease or other very serious conditions, in that I thought my mum had died before she died, and that's quite a common thing because the mum I loved and knew wasn't there anymore. Yeah, so that's why it's such a cruel thing. And very sadly, as people are not suffering from TB or cancer or heart disease, as medical advances certainly in our culture are progressing, so we're going to get conditions such as dementia being more apparent. Yeah. So I think we need to actually recognise that it's a disease. It's not a natural consequence of aging. I want to stress that. It is not a natural consequence of aging. It is a disease of older people. But it is a disease. And if it's a disease, there is a mechanism. We think we've uncovered that. And you can therefore get a readout of it and you can tackle it. And that's what we're trying to do.
I think what's so exciting is the idea that you're working with the body to help it help itself, as opposed to putting something on top of the body. And that's really revolutionary.
Yeah, well, what you have to do is to actually ask why it's happening in the first place or how it's happening. And a lot of people will just see something in the brain, such as amyloid, and say, let's target that, without actually having a rationale or an understanding of it. Because I've come quite late in my life to the private sector. I never thought I'd do this. I was a don at Oxford, and having the high table life in my Oxford college. I got used to asking the really basic questions, and I had the privilege of teaching very, very bright medical students at Oxford. So they challenge you, and you have these one-on-one conversations. And by doing that, you can actually ask questions, have proper explanations, rather than just taking a quick fix and copying everyone else.
Now, I know we have done that much time, but I would be absolutely remiss if I didn't also acknowledge the incredible work you've done with so many of the students that now work and help you research, that you actually found some of them and helped them along their journey to become neuroscientists like yourself. Yeah. I'd love for you to talk about that.
Well, it touches on previous themes about women, because, as you know, we're hugely underrepresented. Apparently, only 2% of VC funding goes to women CEOs, which I just put it out there. So what I do about it is I just try and help as many girls and women as possible in science as much as I can for what it is. Neurobio, which is my company, you heard it here first, NEURO-BIO. We have more women than men, just by chance. I mean, it's not a deliberate policy, it's just we take the best people. And as it happens, we have more women than men. We've got some men, but... and I think that gives people confidence. And the most important thing that I can do is to actually get the girls and women I work with not to be scared, and just to call something out if you think it's wrong. Always polite and courteous, but not to put up with people trying to patronise you, which is, of course, the biggest issue, or put you down, but just be courteous and just be very good. And if you're very good, then it's a bit like when I fly. If I hear that the captain, when they say this is the captain, it's a woman, I always feel, well, I'm super safe, because they've probably had a harder battle. So I do that, yeah. Whenever I can, if I can, I will mentor as much. Someone wants to find a mentor, or someone who believes in you more than you believe in yourself. So I try and do that.
Now, I know that you've been such a champion for women in STEM in general, obviously, but one of the things that I saw that in some of your past interviews is you talked about a historical figure during Mussolini's reign, a woman that eventually got the Nobel Prize.
She's my heroine. Yeah, okay, so this is my absolute role model. And I'm sure many of you have heard. Are there any Italians here? You put your hands up. Okay, so you'll have heard of Rita Levi-Montalcini? Yes. Yeah, okay, so she's the one. So Rita Levi was born in about 1903, I think, but in the early part of the 20th century. She was Jewish, and she was a doctor. And when the fascists came to power, she was forbidden from practicing medicine. And so what she did, and it makes me shiver as I say this actually, she set up a lab in her own home. And the work she did there on something called nerve growth factor actually eventually won her the Nobel Prize. So it's a very controversial. And if you see pictures of her, she lived till she was 103, and literally, and she was beautiful. She had her hair elegant, and she was the most amazing woman. Was also in the equivalent of the House of Lords in Italy, I gather. That is your upper house. So she's my role model, because she said, above all, do not fear difficult moments. The best comes from them. Yeah.
That's incredible. And just the trailblazing that she did, that you're continuing to do, the young women that you're helping to become neuroscientists, the minds that you hope your work is going to help preserve. I mean, to me, my mom struggled with Alzheimer's, and the idea of something with your work is really a gift of time. If any of you can think of the people that you love the most in your life, and what you would do to have more time with them if you've lost someone. But it's even harder sometimes when they're physically there, but they're not.
That's the saddest.
Mentally and emotionally there. And that's the gift that your work is.
I hope so. And this was done way before. My mum only died last year. But now I do feel I can look people in the eye, like you, and I can literally say I know what it feels like. It's not some high-flowing professor. I know what it feels like to have someone that you admired. In my mum's case, she had the same hairstyle as the Queen, because she put curlers in every night. She had curly hair. And there was one day my brother sent me a photo, and suddenly there's this old hag with straight hair and no makeup, and the real mum would have been horrified at that picture. She was
I know one of the things, I'm sure I don't know if she got to see you do this or not, but you actually addressed the House of Lords on the topic of Alzheimer's.
I have to say about that. I have to put that. I've been in the House of Lords for over 20 years, so yeah. And she actually came to that. I have to tell you this quick story. So they phone up and say, will you accept a peerage? And he goes, yeah. But you mustn't tell anyone until it's in the papers. And I said to my mum, look, something really nice has happened to me, but I can't tell you what it is because I've been sworn to, and I know you won't keep the secret. I know you won't, so it's not even, I said, I can guess what it is. And I said, what do you think it is, Mum? You're pregnant. And I said, no, Mum, I don't think that actually qualifies. I said, oh, I'm not pregnant. Oh, I know. Now notice this is the second thing. I'm not pregnant. Oh, it must you've won that Nobel Prize thing, haven't you? And I said, no, notice pregnancy gave before the Nobel Prize. I said, order of desirability. And then when I said, well, actually, we're going to, in the House of All, they said, so does that mean you'll be on the telly? That was the Doris Greenfield gold standard of success. And I think coming from a background like that, it grounds you, yeah, and it stops you getting, as Australians will say, up yourself, you know? And that's always been something I've treasured in her for doing that. So.
Susan has been incredibly humble. She has received more awards than I could possibly list here. And, yet the work that you are doing really needs more support. And I'm not saying this because I'm personally benefiting from any of it financially, but this is really, in my mind, the work that she is doing is something that can save lives, save relationships, we're talking about mental health, preserve the mental health of families. I mean, to me, what you're doing is absolutely invaluable because it's protecting the families in future. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you for your support and for belief in us. And you'll be able to tell your grandchildren, one day I went to this strange baroness, and now, look, we don't have to worry about Alzheimer's anymore. And you'll remember this day that you heard it here first.
Yeah.